I'm going to call to order the September 18, 2019 meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals. May we have a roll? Oh,
Yes. Ms. Chester?
yeah.
Mr. Cho? Ms. McLaughlin?
Here.
Mr. Rush?
Here.
Ms. Uchtman?
Here.
Mr. Warmbrun? Here. And Mr. Welch?
Here. We have a quorum. Are there any changes to our agenda?
There are none.
All right. This time I would ask for approval of the minutes of the August 21, 2019 meeting.
I move that we approve the minutes from the previous meeting.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded, and we have voice vote, please. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed by the same sign? The minutes are approved. Do we have any communications other than what's been placed on our desk?
Nothing other than those.
Okay. At this time, then, we will continue the public hearing from August 21st, 2019. Yeah, I better. This time, I would swear anyone who wishes to give testimony before the board tonight, please stand. Do you swear that anyone else that wishes to be heard? You're not obligated to, but you need to be sworn in if you possibly want to. Do each of you swear or affirm that any testimony you give will be accurate to the best of your belief? Yes. Thank you. Then at this time, we'll have a continued public hearing from the August 21st, 2019 meeting. And we have a staff report.
Thank you. Let me pull that up. Good evening. So tonight we are going to, as asked of staff last month, we are going to kind of cover a lot of the staff findings of the cases before you, and we're going to have some discussion of the staff findings. So the zoning permit applications here tonight. Dan Gordon is the owner of 308 West California Avenue, and he is requesting a conditional use permit to allow the existing garage to be used as a dwelling on his property at 308 West California Avenue. The second dwelling is considered a second principal structure, and more than one principal structure on a lot requires a conditional use permit in the R2 single-family residential zoning district. This case was originally heard, as mentioned prior, on August 21st, 2019, at the Zoning Board of Appeals meeting. And in your staff report, you have the minutes, but also a discussion of common public input items, and we're going to discuss a little bit of that in our memo tonight, as well as partial approval options as requested last month. Major variances that Dan Gordon are applying for tonight and requesting. It's a major variance to allow a principal building encroach 7 feet into the required 10-foot rear yard. A minor variance to allow a principal building to encroach 1 foot into the required 5-foot side yard. A major variance to allow a duplex on a lot that's narrower than 60 feet in R2, and a minor variance for parking to allow 3 parking spaces rather than 4 for 2 principal structures. Not everybody was here last month, so I'm going to go briefly over some of the facts of the case. Here you can see where 308 West California is located. This is a single-family home that is rented next door on a block that has a mix of rental, multi-family buildings, and a duplex. It is across the street from Leal Elementary School. In the zoning map is solidly R2, single-family residential zoning. A zoning district that says in our zoning ordinance that is single-family, though it does allow for a limited amount of duplexes. Future land use map here is residential. This is from our 2005 comprehensive plan for the city of Urbana. And then we have further exhibits. We discussed this, we're going to discuss this further later on tonight. So pull out of that and proceed. To discuss a little bit about the case, I'm going to go over the timeline of events. The property in the late 80s had an illegal, not authorized sale of 6 feet from one property owner to the other in order for 310 West California to properly sell their home. The owners of the 310 West California then bought that home. The new owners eventually in 2009 bought 308 West California and eventually converted their garage for car and storage use into a apartment building. That garage at that point became a dwelling building. This was an illegal conversion. There were no building permits that were pulled for it. There were no zoning permissions. There was an addition that was added to the garage to help facilitate the mechanical and electrical and plumbing that really staff believes runs from the house. So a lot was really under the radar. That side yard encroachment is 0.7 feet due to the fact that that addition was done without any building permits, and regardless of the outcomes of tonight's hearing or city council hearing, this addition would have to be removed. So that has made this major variance for the side yard a minor variance. The rear yard, as you can see by this survey, is only 3 feet. The garage is only 3 feet from the property line. Garages are allowed to be built within 18 inches of a property line, but dwelling units are not allowed to be built in the rear yard. So it's 7 feet in the required rear yard. We have an FAR. FAR for R2 is 0.4. The garage, when you add that into the lot's FAR, it becomes 0.51. The parking lot was previously discussed in the application as fitting 2 cars. Staff went out and found that there are space for 3 legal parking spots. So that has become a minor variance as well. For the first major variance that we're discussing, the FAR, to go into a little bit of detail, the house is 1,800 square feet. That is applied to the FAR calculation. The garage dwelling is 1,650 square feet. That is for the FAR calculation. A small urban lot for this lot is 6,715 square feet, which meets the requirement for a duplex to be established on an older lot, but the width, of course, is not, and that is another major variance. R2 max FAR is 0.4, which only allows for 2,686 square feet of building. For 308 West California, there is approximately 3,400 square feet, and if you divide that by the lot size, is 0.51. For the first major variance of the yards would be the rear yard, and from the survey you could tell that there's a structure that is pretty average for garages along that alleyway. But once it becomes a dwelling unit, it is treated differently than garages. And so it is too close to the rear property line. Here you can see the addition that was added on. It doesn't quite match the roof line on the other side of the garage. And that, again, was to protect and shield the mechanical and plumbing for the garage unit. And here you can see the required parking. I will say that when the staff went out for the systematic rental inspection, which was also an inspection to assess the conditions of the illegal conversion of the garage apartment, the staff had seen that and talked to Dan Gordon and found out that there was no one renting there who would want to have a car. After staff has been monitoring the property through the alleyway occasionally, and we have not seen anyone park in that that parking area. You can see in the picture that's Dan Gordon, the applicant's truck. The lot was originally platted many moons ago in 1852. The previous owners, like I said before, they owned 310, and right before that, they had bought 310. The owner had transferred 6 feet to 310. The last month, we had heard public input for and against the case. And staff would like to go over a little bit of the public input after we did some further research, some general concerns that were brought up. So several people expressed concern that granting their requests will set a precedent that will need to be followed in future cases. After talking to legal and what would follow, what staff has advised the Zoning Board of Appeals in previous cases, the ZBA reviews each case on its own merits with respect to established criteria. Decisions are not made based on previous cases or the concept of precedent. All cases are different, and all cases must be judged against the relevant criteria. Granting a request in one case does not set a precedent that must be followed in other cases, since all cases are unique. That's a very important thing because it would greatly adjust how people's rights and abilities to apply for variances in the future. There were concerns that if the requests are approved, illegal work on the garage would continue. The structure will need to be brought up to code whether the requests are approved or denied. There was a concern that there was no compelling reason to grant approval. The Zoning Board of Appeals must evaluate the variance and conditional use criteria to determine whether there is a compelling reason to grant the request or not. And staff has received 7 additional letters since the August 21st meeting. 4 were in favor of granting the request, 3 were opposed. And you can see in Exhibit G, you had one that was prior to the September 13th packet delivery, and then you have additional 6 that were handed to you tonight. I'm going to go over the conditional use criteria. The Zoning Board of Appeals must evaluate conditional use permit applications based on 3 criteria below, which are presented in the analysis by staff. 1, that the proposed use is conducive to public convenience at that location. The applicant states in his letter to the Zoning Board of Appeals that the garage apartments were good for graduate students and were affordable. The area is close to downtown Urbana and the University of Illinois campus, and it is walkable and bikeable, making it a convenient location for renters who may not own a car and who desire to live in a quiet area. The second criteria, that the proposed use is designed, located, and proposed to be operated so that it will not be unreasonably injurious or detrimental to the district in which it will be located or otherwise injurious to the public welfare. City staff has received no complaints about the existing apartments in the garage. In addition, no one testified at the public hearing that the garage apartments have been a nuisance, and none of the communications received had indicated that the apartments had been problematic or detrimental to the neighborhood. The proposal would remove 3 illegal, non-code compliant apartments and replace them with 1 apartment that will meet building codes and, depending on which, if any variances are granted, will comply with zoning regulations. The proposed use would then be legal and would not be unreasonably injurious or detrimental to the district or the public. The third criteria, that the proposed use conforms with the applicable regulations and standards of, and preserves the essential character of, the district in which it shall be located, except where such regulations and standards are modified by Section 7-6. The R2 Single-Family Residential Zoning District does allow duplexes if a conditional use permit is granted. Of the R2 properties in West Urbana neighborhood, approximately 10% of the properties contain legally nonconforming duplexes. The essential character of the district is mostly single-family homes with a small but not insignificant number of duplexes, plus an even smaller number of older apartment buildings. An additional duplex should not have a significant impact on the character of the neighborhood, since it appears that the previous owners were likely trying to hide the conversion of the garage from neighbors. The building has been kept to look like a garage on a single-family home lot. The previous owner converted the garage into apartments and added a utility area on the east side of the building. The conversion created a dwelling that is too close to the rear and side lot line, has too much living space, is on too small of a lot, and has less parking than is required. The applicant seeks variances to address each of these zoning deficiencies. Of the 5 original major variance requests, it has been discovered that 2 would only require minor variances. First, the applicant would need to remove the utility area that was built on the side yard, whether the variances are approved or not. This will reduce the encroachment into the 5-foot side yard from 4 feet to 1. Second, the parking area is large enough for 3 parking spaces, so the variance request for parking is to reduce the parking from 4 spaces to 3. The remaining variance requests are still require major variances. Now we're going to go over to variance criteria. These are all going to be addressed by staff together, as they are all pertain to the same property and subject. The first major and minor variance criteria: are there special circumstances or special practical difficulties with reference to the parcel concerned in carrying out the strict application of the ordinance? The lot is narrower than required due to 6 feet of lot width having been transferred to 310 West California Avenue in 1990, prior to the house being built at 308 West California Avenue. The city had no knowledge of the land transaction, and had it been aware, the transaction would not have been approved because it would have violated the subdivision and land development code by making 308 West California Avenue a non-conforming lot. The land transfer also reduced the amount of usable floor area that can be built on the lot, and the lot is narrower than 60 feet required to establish a duplex on the lot. It isn't feasible to transfer 2.22 feet from either adjacent property to widen the lot to 60 feet. Another practical difficulty is that when the garage was built, it was considered an accessory structure. Accessory structures can be built legally up to 18 inches from side and rear property lines. So the garage conformed to the requirements of the zoning ordinance. Once the previous owner illegally converted the garage into apartments, it became an illegal second principal structure. Illegal both because the use was not allowed and because it did not meet the required yard setbacks for principal structures. Since the garage is already within the required side and rear yards, it would be impractical to meet the yard requirements if the conditional use permit is granted and the garage is allowed as a second principal structure. Exhibit E, the site survey, shows that the garage is closer than 18 inches from the property line because a small mechanical room was added when the garage was converted to apartments. This room will be needed to be removed regardless of the outcome of these variance requests. With respect to parking, there is a 27-foot deep by 31-foot wide concrete area on the site, which can accommodate 3 cars. Expanding the parking area is impractical because it would reduce the size of the small backyard on the site, and additional parking may be unnecessarily given that none of the current tenants own cars. There are no special circumstances regarding the request to increase the floor area ratio. The lot width is small, but the size, 6,670 square feet, exceeds minimum requirements of the zoning ordinance. The owner could reduce the total amount of living space in the garage and meet the .4 FAR requirement for the R2 single-family residential zoning district. The second major variance criteria. The proposed variances will not serve as a special privilege because the variance requested is necessary due to special circumstances relating to the land or structure involved or to be for occupancy thereof, which is not generally applicable to other lands or structures in the same district. The rear and side yard variances and parking variances relate to the garage's location on the lot and will not serve as a special privilege to the owner, as the garage was illegally converted to a dwelling unit by the previous owner. The applicant bought the property in this condition and is attempting to bring the property into compliance with building safety and zoning codes. The lot width variance is also not a special privilege, as the lot was illegally subdivided when a previous owner sold 6 feet of the property's width to the owners of 310 West California Avenue, creating a non-conforming lot width. The request to increase the FAR would serve as a special privilege, as there are no special circumstances that necessitate an increase of in FAR. Staff does not recommend granting FAR variance request. The variance request is not a result of a situation or condition having been knowingly or deliberately created by the petitioner. The applicant bought the property in its current condition and believed that the property had all necessary approvals and inspections when the garage was converted to a dwelling. Staff estimates the garage was converted in 2011. It is not unreasonable for the applicant to think that the units were illegal since they had been in use for 8 years. However, it is up to the purchaser of the property to confirm that all local, state, and federal regulations are being met prior to purchase to make sure that it meets code. If the previous owner had submitted building plans to city staff to convert the garage to a dwelling, it would then have been required to be built to meet building and safety codes. The absence of permits indicates that the conversion was not legal and could have been discovered by the applicant prior to purchasing the property. While Mr. Gordon did not directly create the situation he now seeks to rectify with the variance request, he could have performed more due diligence before making the purchase. The fourth variance criteria, apologize. The variances will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. The variances requested will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. The garage was built in 1992 and has been used as a dwelling unit since at least 2011. There are no complaints on record about the garage, and none of the testimony at the public hearing on August 21st or the correspondence received has indicated that the existing apartments have been problematic. The essential character of the neighborhood is that it contains mostly single-family homes, but also a fair amount of duplexes and some older apartment buildings. There are also numerous homes in the neighborhood on smaller lots, and more than half of the homes surrounding the property are rental units. The request for an increase in floor area ratio is greater than the minimum deviation necessary to allow a garage apartment. As discussed above, FAR regulates the intensity of the use allowed on a parcel, and in this case, the FAR variance would allow a more intense use by allowing more living space than the R2 district allows. Again, staff does not recommend granting an FAR variance request. The fifth variance criteria. The variances will not cause a nuisance to the adjacent property. There are no complaints on record about the garage or its tenants. If the variances or the CUP are approved, the owner will have to make significant renovations to bring the building up to code, which should reduce the likelihood of the property becoming a nuisance. The sixth major variance criteria. The variances generally represent the minimum deviation for requirements of the zoning ordinance necessary to accommodate the request. The variance requests generally represent the minimum deviation from the requirements of the zoning ordinance necessary to allow the continued operation of the garage as a dwelling. The applicant requests variances that are necessary to allow the garage to remain in place with no exterior changes. The request for the increase in floor area ratio, however, is greater than the minimum deviation necessary. As discussed above, FAR regulates the intensity of the use allowed on a parcel, and in this case, the FAR variance would allow a more intense use by allowing more living space than the R2 district allows. As requested last month, there is staff prepared a couple of options. There's many options, as you can see. It's almost an overwhelming amount of options in Exhibit F for partial approval. Outside of just entertaining a complex decision tree matrix, there are three kind of more natural partial approval options that staff have identified. Partial approval option A, allow a second floor apartment, require the first floor to revert back to vehicle parking and storage. To accomplish this, CBA would recommend approval of lot width and rear yard variances and approve side yard minor variance. The FAR variance and parking variance would not be necessary. Partial approval option B, allow the first floor apartment, require the second floor to revert back to storage, kind of like an attic space. To accomplish this, the ZBA would recommend the approval of lot width and rear yard variances and approve the side yard and parking minor variances. The FAR variance would not be necessary. Partial approval option C, add an additional dwelling unit, but not in the garage. To accomplish this, ZBA would recommend approval of lot width variance. The applicant would be allowed to build an additional 875 square feet of living space in addition in an additional dwelling structure. All other regulations would need to be met. Before I get to options, I'm going to go through a case summary. Case summary. 1, the property is zoned R2, single-family residential. 2, Dan Gordon requests a conditional use permit to allow a second principal structure in the R2 single-family residential zoning district. 3, the use is conducive to the public convenience at that location, as the garage has been used as a dwelling for many years without any recorded complaints from the neighbors or tenants, and is in a location close to downtown and the University of Illinois. 4, the use is designed, located, and proposed to be operated so that it will not be unreasonably injurious or detrimental to the district in which it shall be located. If the owner renovates the building to meet all building codes and gets a new certificate of occupancy for the garage dwelling. 5, the use will conform to all applicable zoning, building, and development codes if certain variances are granted. 6, Mr. Gordon also requests multiple major variances to allow a principal structure to encroach 7.1 feet into the required rear yard, to encroach 4.3 feet, encroach 1 foot, that is, into the required side yard, allow a floor area ratio of 0.51, which is a 27.5% greater than what is allowed, to reduce the parking required from 4 spaces to 3 spaces, to reduce the lot width required by 2.22 feet, which is 3.7% less than what is required. 7, the variances would allow the existing garage to be used as a dwelling. 8, the rear yard, side yard, and lot width variances do not serve as a special privilege to the property owner, as there are special circumstances relating to the land, including that the garage was built to code but later converted illegally into a dwelling, and that part of the parcel was illegally sold and recorded, creating a non-conforming lot. And 9, the property owner did not deliberately create the situation, as the previous property owner had illegally converted the garage into a dwelling and illegally subdivided the lot. 10, the rear yard, side yard, and lot width variances will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. As the garage was built in 1992 and has been used as a dwelling since at least 2011, and there are no complaints on record about the garage or any indication that the existing apartments have been problematic. 11, the rear yard, side yard, and lot width variances will not create a nuisance, as there have been no complaints about the garage apartments or its tenants. and the owner will have to make significant renovations to bring the building up to code, which should reduce the likelihood of the property becoming a nuisance. 12. The rear yard, side yard, and lot width variances represent the minimum deviation necessary from the zoning ordinance, as the variances would allow the garage to remain in place with no exterior changes. 13. Floor area ratio variance and parking variance requests are not necessary, as there are no special circumstances that necessitate the requests. The requests would serve as a special privilege to the applicant, and the requests do not represent a minimum deviation necessary from the zoning ordinance to allow the use of the garage as a dwelling. Now the options. Staff recommends the Zoning Board of Appeals vote on a conditional use permit first, and then the variances. The Zoning Board of Appeals has the following option in case ZBA-2019-C-03. 1, approve the conditional use permit, or 2, approve the conditional use permit along with any conditions as are appropriate for the public health, safety, and welfare to carry out the purposes of the zoning ordinance, or 3, deny the conditional use permit. For major variance 5, ZBA-2019 major-05 and 06 and 010, the following options are forward the major variance request to City Council with a recommendation to approve the major variance as requested based on the findings outlined in this memorandum, or forward the major variance to City Council with a recommendation to approve the variances with certain terms and conditions, and if so, articulate all terms, conditions, and findings, or 3, deny the major variance requests, and if so, articulate findings to support the denial. For the minor variances, ZBA-19-major-08 and 09, the Zoning Board of Appeals has the following options. 1, approve the minor variance, or 2, approve the minor variance along with any conditions as appropriate for public health, safety, and welfare, and to carry out the purposes of the zoning ordinance, or 3, deny the minor variance request. Staff recommendation. Conditional use permits may be granted with conditions to ensure the use is convenient, not detrimental, and ensuring conformity with all other regulations. Based on the analysis and findings presented above, and without the benefit of considering additional evidence that may be presented at the public hearing, staff recommends that the Zoning Board of Appeals approve the conditional use permit with the following conditions: that prior to occupancy, the garage will be inspected to ensure it meets all building code requirements for the establishment of a dwelling unit. The applicant will obtain a new certificate of occupancy for the garage structure. Staff recommends the Zoning Board of Appeals recommend approval of a major variance for the rear yard and a major variance for the lot width to rear yard and lot width to City Council, and approve 1 minor variance for the side yard. Staff recommends that the Zoning Board of Appeals recommend to deny 1 major variance for floor area ratio to City Council and 1 minor variance for parking.
Thank you, Lily. Are there any questions for staff? Go ahead.
Okay. Let's see, our option A was to allow a second floor apartment, require the first floor to revert back to vehicle parking and storage. So we'd have 5 parking spots in that scenario?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then in option B, because we're going to have the apartment on the first floor, we're going to have storage on the second floor. Then we're back to where we have the, we need to approve the parking because there's only 3 there.
Yes, and if there's 5 parking spots, they don't have to necessarily be used for parking. It's that they're provided to have parking spaces if people need them.
And at the last meeting, we talked about how many people could live in this one dwelling unit, and I believe you responded as the number of bedrooms. Do we have any knowledge of what that's going to be?
So that can be due to the fact that there's such substantial work that needs to be done on the garage, whether approval or not approval. If it was approved for a dwelling unit, it could be re-subdivided for bedrooms to fit maybe barely. And I'm not an architect, but it might be able to fit 4 bedrooms. One thing that Zoning Board of Appeals could do is have a condition to the conditional use permit that would limit the amount of people who it could be rented to.
See, normally, we would have plans drawn up that says, this is, our typical cases, this is for my mother-in-law or my mother or my father or something that's going to live in my garage on my property. And people come to us and show us this. So we could limit it, say, to 2 bedrooms, and then that means 2 people.
I think saying 2 people rather than 2 bedrooms would be maybe easier to put on the conditional use permit for staff, for enforcement.
So, to make it clear, you could conceivably have 4 people living in this unit.
It would be very difficult.
No, but 2 people could share a bedroom. You could have a 2-bedroom unit and 4 occupants.
Yes.
For clarity, these options for partial approval, these seem more like choices for the applicant, in the sense that don't we have to kind of approve or deny each of these variances as written?
Absolutely. When discussing with Dan Gordon immediately after the, and this can be something you can ask the applicant who's here in the audience tonight, but when discussing the tear down of the side mechanical, the applicant said he would agree to tearing off the side of the garage. Regardless of whether it's approved or denied, there would be, it's an illegal addition,
Right.
and it would have to be rebuilt to city building code.
Mhm.
So,
Okay. But just to clarify, we're not really deciding on option A, B, or C. We're deciding on each of the variances.
absolutely.
Okay,
Yes.
that's all.
Thank you.
Any, excuse me, any additional questions for staff?
I have one more. With regard to the parking, what was the reasoning for denying the parking variance?
To reduce the FAR and to restore the garage to partial garage use, but also still permit a small apartment.
Right.
Seemed to fit in more with the character of the neighborhood and meet the criteria. So, as outlined in the variance criteria.
So
Right.
if the FAR was reduced, is the logic behind the parking that if the FAR is reduced, that automatically allows for more parking?
So if the FAR was reduced and the first floor was converted back to parking, that would automatically provide the spaces that are required in the zoning ordinance.
I think the logic is that if the parking variance is denied, it would force the applicant to have to choose to convert the first floor back into parking, as opposed to have the option of whether to use the first floor for living space or the second floor for living space. Because one of those has to go unless the FAR variance is
Right.
approved.
Right.
Yeah.
How much living space, legal living space, could you have on the second floor?
That would depend on whether one of the options in here would be to deny all variances but approve a conditional use permit. So it would depend on whether the applicant would want to have a second dwelling unit, but it would be in a different structure, or whether they would want to use, depending on what is discussed here tonight, use the garage reused.
Well, no, I meant that if the garage, if the first floor was returned to garage, what is the square footage of usable space on the second floor?
So we would consider in the zoning ordinance, the full size of the first floor is the living space that's used in our calculation of FAR for the second floor. So,
Say that again?
so the full size of the first floor is, it's kind of like the layer cake that I had last month on a picture, but it would be, the size of the first floor is doubled. So as opposed to actual living space where there's maybe a really pitched roof that doesn't make the full size of the room.
But the footprint of the second floor is essentially the same as the footprint of the first floor.
Yes,
Right.
as far as
So-
floor area ratio, and that's,
Okay.
Yeah, what, under 800 feet?
yes.
Little under 800, 700 to 800 square feet, something like that.
That's what the garage is?
875 square feet per floor.
And that's
For floor area
exterior,
ratio, but-
exterior
For floor area
wall.
ratio.
But that's not living space.
Right.
But that's not living space.
And so do you have a calculation?
I don't have a
So
calculation,
do you
and our
know how
zoning
much living
ordinance
space there
doesn't.
is on the second floor?
No. I would have to get a building plan for that, and it is not something that we had. We had a survey done.
Okay. And there's just one apartment up there now?
There's currently one efficiency apartment on the second floor.
Like one room?
One room, a kitchen off to the side, and a bathroom.
Okay.
Are there any other questions for staff?
Oh, I have one.
Go ahead.
So, what are the kinds of things that have to be done to this garage to make it a dwelling unit? Does it have a foundation now?
It does have a foundation, but so that would be one of the things that building safety would have to go through and inspect the foundation for whether it would meet the requirements for a dwelling unit. I will tell you that building safety, if what you're trying to ask is what necessarily specifically has to be done, building safety has said that it really does depend on what they find when they start to go into the building structure. And based on the knowledge, I was concerned about the foundation too, the knowledge that building safety shared a little bit with that. The foundation requirements are fairly different, significantly different between a garage and a dwelling unit. And that's something that the property owner will have to address and meet those building codes. So, yeah.
Okay. And the house itself now, is it still a single-family house?
It's a single-family house that is rented.
Okay. I'm done.
Is there a good reason why the minor variances are still labeled major?
Yeah, I think I inquired in that too, as I'm a new employee to the city of Urbana, and to the best of my knowledge, with how we administratively catalog case files, when something is moved down, it doesn't need to be re-advertised, and so part of it is our advertising and notification requirements in the newspaper and neighbor notice, and so if it becomes more of a significant variance, then we need to start over with our notification requirements and schedule.
So in approving or not approving these things, we refer to them as a minor or major?
When you're talking about the case number, it says major, but when
Uh-huh.
you're talking about what you're approving, it's a minor variance.
Because the minor variance only needs 50%, right? 51% of the votes. The other needs 2/3. Major, okay.
Going back to the question about the foundation,
Mhm.
I assume the owner would not be pursuing this unless he thinks the foundation would be found acceptable?
There
Or
are,
is he going to apply for a variance about the foundation?
there are no plans for that.
There's no possibility of that? And
Uh,
I guess I'm surprised that the building inspector has not weighed in on the foundation.
The building inspector has been working with planning and zoning through this whole process. As being a building inspector is not in my expertise. So they have been very graciously guiding planning through this whole process. There are, though one could see them as very expensive and costly ways of making the foundation, if it's, for instance, just a garage foundation, not something that would meet the requirements for a dwelling unit foundation, ways that the property owner would be able to mitigate the foundation in a way that would meet building code. It's costly and it's hard to do. But we don't know what the foundation is until the building safety really goes in and starts working with the property owner to get the garage back to building code for either a garage or a dwelling unit.
I would remind the committee that I don't really think that's in the purview of these decisions. So I'm not sure that's immediately pertinent.
Yeah, I think, I'll just say, I think the applicant made it clear that he wants to seek approval first to see if he has approval to even proceed, and then make sure he meets all necessary requirements to make this a suitable living environment if approval is granted.
Any further questions? Thank you. You said the applicant is present. I wasn't here, so last time, so I don't recognize him. Okay. he's
Yes,
there.
the applicant is present.
Would you like to be heard, sir?
I would, if people have questions.
Why don't you come forward?
Greetings.
You know the routine. You got to sign in.
I'll have to go get a pen.
Wait, here.
Can I leave it here for now?
Yeah.
Yes, Dan
Proceed.
Gordon. It's my name. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be open to answering them. I don't have anything.
You don't have any comments? All right. Are there any questions for the applicant? Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, last month, we asked you a few questions, and you had only found out about this 2 or 4 days ahead of time. You had said you hadn't any time to do anything. And one of those questions was about this purchasing of the 2 feet from your neighbor. Have you had an opportunity to explore that?
I have not had the opportunity to explore purchasing 2 feet from either side of the property. I was kind of informed that 310, the one that took the 6 feet, they have built something onto the side, so they can't sell any and still be in compliance with zoning. And I have not approached the other side. I do not know who they are. And that's partially their kind of driveway to get, into the side of their house. And so, to answer your question, I have not pursued that.
And I guess Mr. Cho asked you about the feasibility of demolishing the existing garage and starting over. Have you looked into something like that?
If that is something I probably wouldn't do, I'd probably just keep it as a garage. I wouldn't go through the expenses. Ms. Chester asked a question earlier about the size of the upstairs of the place, which zoning has to say it's the same size as the downstairs, but it's only 300 square feet at most, so there's not a 4-bedroom possibility there. It's a 1-bedroom small unit. That's all that can fit up there at this time. So pouring in a ton of money for this project would not, it's not something we're trying to do. And obviously, and we apologize, we didn't have plans set up like you would normally want to see blueprints for something like that. We're just trying to see if it's possible to do something before we spend a lot more extra money. Then the foundation currently is concrete. I don't know what the rules are for zoning for how thick it has to be for a dwelling versus a regular or a garage. So, I mean, we don't know. We didn't drill down or anything. We just didn't even know that was a thing till just now. So that's kind of where we are, if that helps answer some of the questions.
Then finally,
Could I quickly respond to your first question,
Sure.
actually? At the top of page 6, it says it's unlikely that he could purchase from adjacent properties because the structures on both sides are close to the property lines, and it could create nonconformance. Yeah.
right, well, he said it's not unlikely anymore, it's impossible. So he did check into that, that's good. Okay,
I do remember that 310 has an addition that encroaches, and that's why they had to buy it.
Right.
So it was, yeah, that's why,
okay. Finally, in the staff report, they had partial approval option C, where you would keep your garage and build another living unit. Have you explored that option?
I have not explored that option. That would definitely be not something feasible to have a garage and then a third unit there.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Go ahead.
I guess to clarify that question, so pretty much option A or option B would be your preference?
Correct.
Are there any additional questions for the applicant? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favor of the petition? Hearing none, are there any persons present who wish to speak in opposition to the petition? Please come forward.
Hi, Trent Shepard's my name. I live at 409 West Oregon Street, which is about 2 blocks away from 308 West California. And I remember when the house was built, and I don't remember when the garage was illegally converted and added onto. I don't go down that alley ever. Well, I hadn't until I went to look at what was back there after this whole thing came up. That block in that area is a mix of owner-occupied and rental property, and there are duplexes. The duplexes, I can think of one where there was some kind of I think it was a garage, or I don't even know what it was, on the block away, 1 block away from me, that it has got a second dwelling unit in there, and whether, I've never checked to see whether that's legal or was done illegally like this one. I would say that the ones I can think of, duplexes, are in the same building. A house has been divided up where it was built as a duplex. I think most of them have been a house was divided up and grandfathered in, and garage is converted, either given a conditional use permit to build a garage with a dwelling unit in it, or one that was grandfathered in somehow or illegally built. I'd say those are pretty rare, and this whole convoluted process of the variances and conditional use permit is trying to bend over backward to allow this illegal mess to be a rental unit, I don't understand. There's plenty of for rent signs all around. This town has got plenty of apartments. It's not like we got to cram one more person or two more people into every little possible space. When the staff person was sitting here earlier, I don't know how many times I heard illegal, and I think you're just rewarding illegal when you give a conditional use permit for this mess and for all these variances. And I don't know how many of these 4 new approval letters are from immediate neighbors or if they're from people far away or who they're from. I haven't seen any of that stuff, but my feeling is it's just a bad idea to approve all these variances. And if you have any questions about me, and I've gotten plenty of building permits, I'm a landlord, and I play by the rules. And anyway, anybody have a question for me before I sit back down?
Oh, you don't?
Not a question, but a statement.
Go
All right.
ahead.
Over the time that I was in the assessment business from 1974 to 2010, in the very beginning, there were quite a number of garages that had been converted to apartments.
Okay.
And we would have, like a big Queen Anne house and then a garage in the back that had been made into apartments, one apartment. But over the years, a lot of them were torn down because they were garages. They were garages that were built in the 40s, or maybe some even in the 50s. But there are, I'm sure there are a few that are still there, but in general, they have disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
That's because they were built as garages, and they would become dilapidated. I mean, this is a fairly new garage, and it looks very nice. But it's not something, in all my years, that we saw, because we walked around and looked at everything. We didn't see new garages being built and then made into apartments, or an apartment. It was not something that really happened, because neighbors noticed. And so I think this is just a very uncommon thing, this one.
I would say it's uncommon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's fewer of them than there used to be. So,
Okay.
and, we did get permits for people that were going to make a garage with an apartment above it, but it was all done by permit. So,
Okay.
I'm just curious as to, within this area, let's call it between Race and Lincoln, how many potential garages will people want to convert into living space?
My guess is not too many.
Not
There
too-
aren't that many great garages.
because these
Yeah.
are small and narrow lots,
Yeah.
60 feet, most of the garages are just single-car garages.
Okay, but if you were to look along, let us say, south of California,
It goes
You-
on. One of my new neighbors took a permitted space above a garage and that is now Airbnb-ing it, even though I know it goes on. And I think it's wrong, and I am opposed to it. So,
Right, so I'm just saying, there are homes south of California, which would be also south of Oregon, where there are wider lots where there are detached garages, where there is the potential
Yeah.
to convert to a dwelling unit.
But we're looking at this garage in this
Yeah.
case,
Right.
and whether or not
Right.
this particular lot and this particular garage is appropriate for a living unit, not other garages in other areas.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Anyone else in opposition, please come forward.
I hope I can show some photos that,
You have to sign in too, sir.
thank you.
She'll help you while you sign in, and you can begin
do.
when you are ready.
They have a really big garage. They did not want us to believe.
So they say, one picture is worth 1,000 words. It's actually 1024 words because everything nowadays is digital. So with all due apologies to Gertrude Stein, I'd like to talk about 308 West California. So I only have a few minutes. Here's my outline. Let's see, there's parts of this that I could just drop if it gets too long. So ZBA used to put out an annual report. It's now in the building division. And the latest building division annual report had this figure here. These are the number of ZBA's cases per year. And in the building division, it also lists the number of conditional permits, the number of major variances, the number of minor variances. So I decided that I might add them up and make a similar plot, which I did. You'll notice that there is essentially no difference. This body approves everything. So I know it's insanity to do the same thing again and again, but I'm here. I'd like to focus on the word precedent. And I do that because, as staff read this paragraph, that legally there is no such thing as a precedent. But I asked the question, does staff claim that two cases with substantially the same circumstances should be decided differently? I doubt it. So how many garages have been converted? We don't have any data on that. And how many garages could be converted? That's an interesting question in itself. So I was worried that I didn't understand what precedent meant myself. So Google Cinnamon search, an earlier event or action that's regarded as an example or guide to subsequent similar circumstances. And indeed, community development routinely cites similar circumstances. And I just grabbed 3 of them here. So if 308 West California were approved, it could be futurely cited as a similar circumstance. I'm not going to quibble about whether that's a precedent or not, but community development routinely cites similar circumstances. So the alleyways of West Urbana, here's the red circles note alleyways. And in fact, it's easy with an alleyway to actually see what the condition of the garage is. So I did. And there's the one we're talking about, but what about this one?
That's one.
What about this one? What about this one? Now, I could find, with the tools I have, no conditional use permits, no major variances for these structures. But I have limited tools. I approached staff 3 weeks ago with this, and they haven't gotten back to me yet. And of course, there's this one and this one. So there clearly are possibilities that these could come in front of you for conditional use permits and variances, and 308 West California would be cited as a similar circumstance. Now, the question is often before this body, and for that matter, the Plan Commission and the City Council, do we need more rentals? So I'm not a realtor, but the Census Bureau publishes statistics. Our current vacancy rate in Urbana is 20%. Here's a map of Zillow in the north part of Woonok. There's 77 rentals there currently listed. The south part of Woonok, 36 rentals currently listed. Here's my histogram of the number of bedrooms per rental. There's a lot of one bedroom, a lot of two bedroom, some 3 and 4 bedroom. These are 115 or so different units, many unrented units current. Here's my histogram of the distribution of prices per bedroom, all the way down from 300 to maybe $750 or so. So this area already has ample unrented bedrooms, unrented units, many of which are affordable. How was California missed? Well, it's in Zone 3. Zone 3 was first inspection in 2007. The conversion happened in 2010. It was missed. But however, there was further inspection in 2014. And each of these black dots represents units that were inspected in 2014. And there's 308 West California. They just didn't bother to look. And had you looked at 308, the building, you would have seen a garage with 3 vent stacks. And you don't have to be a contractor to know that that means 3 sinks and toilets. So similar circumstance. This is a Google Street View of 510 West Oregon. It's the home of our good friends and neighbor, Jens Sandberger and Kate Hunter. And they both worked at the university. They retired about a dozen years ago. It's a 1,200 square foot house. It has 1 bedroom, 1 bath. And upon retirement, they said to themselves, you know, it's going to get pretty close here with both of us in the same building all day. And so what they did was approach community development. Couldn't we take, and this is from a ZBA document, couldn't we take this garage and make it into something we could use as a room? Community development at that time discouraged placing plumbing in that unit because it would require a conditional use permit and many major variances. It would, in fact, require a major variance because this is very close to the lot line. A major variance was approved. This is the structure that was built on the lot line. This upstairs here is a nice room where either Jens or Kate could go and escape from either Kate or Jens, but it is not a dwelling unit because it could not have plumbing. So approval of the garage would be a precedent. Let's not quibble about that. It would invite conversions of other garages. There are already conversions already. There's no demonstrable need for more rentals here. 308 should continue as a garage. We should deny all other requests. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you. Go ahead, Nancy.
I do have a question for the staff. Given the photos he showed of these other garages, which have apparently been converted to, I'm going to guess, living spaces, have you looked into this or had the time to respond to Mr. Debovic?
No, we don't have the staff resources to look into that.
Go ahead, Joanne.
I know at least one of them that has had permits. The brick one, the carriage house, has always gotten permits for everything they've done in there. And that's been, and my guess is some of those other ones were there before the zoning ordinance before 1955.
Question for staff. Are we allowed to speculate the future economics of rentals in part of this decision? Or are we allowed to speculate, I guess, the appetite for converting garages or future garages as part of this decision?
What you should concern yourselves with are the criteria for conditional use permit and variances.
Any other comments? Thank you. In light of what has been presented, is there any additional staff comment? Well, I was going to get to that.
I'd just like to make one clarification. So, and this is no fault of Mr. DeBevick's, the website that he cited, we looked into that because Michael Plua had shared the same rental vacancy rate of 20.4% from that website. And while that website says that it uses the American Community Survey, the American Community Survey actually reports a 9.8% rental vacancy rate. I contacted the website, haven't heard anything back. So that's where that is. The rental vacancy rate is actually 9.8% as of 2017. That's the most recent data available.
Thank you. Go ahead, Matt.
But like you said, I guess whether that's 9%, 20%, I guess, is that a factor we should consider in our approval of these?
It is not.
Okay.
It is not. Thank you.
Any additional comments from anyone in the audience? Hearing none, I guess we're ready to call these matters for motions. And after we do, I will entertain any additional comments from the board members regarding the motions. So, do we have any motions?
I move that we approve the conditional use permit in case ZBA 2019-C-03.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded regarding, let me get my numbers straight here, ZBA 2019-C-03. Is there any additional discussion or comment by any member of the board? Hearing none, I believe we are ready to call this matter for a vote.
Ms. Chester?
No.
Mr. Cho?
Yes.
Ms. McLaughlin?
Yes.
Mr. Rush?
Yes.
Ms. Uchtman?
No.
Mr. Warmbrun?
Yes.
Mr. Welch?
Yes, that motion carries by the necessary votes to be approved without further action. We should just go down the list then. The next,
Do we need to actively vote to deny a motion, or do we need to just skip it?
Yes, you do need to actively vote on each case.
I move that we deny the request for ZBA 2019 Major 05, the floor area ratio matter.
all right, it's been moved. Do we have a second to that motion? Second. It's been moved and seconded. Again, is there any additional discussion by any member of the board? Hearing none, we now wish to call that matter for a vote.
Ms. Chester?
Which one is this again?
This is the 2019 MAJ 05, the floor area. Sorry, and the motion, just to clarify, the motion was to deny
Yes.
the request. Okay. All right, Mr. Cho? Ms. McLaughlin?
Yes.
Mr. Rush?
Yes.
Ms. Uchtman?
No.
Mr. Warmbrad?
Yes.
Mr. Welch?
Yes. That motion has been denied, so we need take no further action on that. Next would be ZBA 2019-Major-06. We have a motion regarding that matter.
I move that we approve the motion.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion by any board member regarding this particular item? Hearing none, we would now call this matter for vote.
Ms. Chester?
No.
Mr. Cho? Ms. McLaughlin?
Yes.
Mr. Rush?
Yes.
Ms. Uchtman?
No.
Mr. Warmbrad?
Yes.
Mr. Welch?
Yes. That was still major, right?
Yeah, so that would be a recommendation to approve.
Yes,
so that would
that-
go.
That motion has been approved by the necessary vote of the Zoning Board of Appeals to forward it on to the City Council for their consideration and approval or disapproval. And what meeting would that be presented at?
October 7th.
At their October 7th City Council meeting. We at 8 now?
Yes.
Now, at this time, we call ZBA-2019-Major-08.
I move that we approve ZBA 2019-Major-08.
It's been moved. Is there a second to that motion? I think it was simultaneously, so.
Here, rock, paper, scissors. Okay, Matt can have it.
I'm sorry, what now?
Is this a minor one now, because that piece of the property has to come off?
It is a minor,
It is
but
a
it's
minor,
listed as
but it
major.
retains the same
name
same
states
designation. This being a minor variance, it only needs to be approved by this board, and it only needs to be approved by a majority vote. So can we call this one now for a vote?
Ms. Chester?
Yes.
Mr. Cho? Ms. McLaughlin?
Yes.
Mr. Rush?
Yes.
Ms. Uchtman? Mr. Warmbrad?
Yes.
Mr. Welch?
Yes, that motion is approved by the necessary vote of this board, and it has been approved. We now call ZBA-2019-Major-09.
I move that we approve the minor variance listed as ZBA-2019-Major-09.
Do we have a second to this motion? It's been seconded. Again, do we have any further discussion by the board?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Are you calling this a major variance to reduce the required parking?
No, it's been reclassified as a minor variance, but it's still listed under a major variance heading.
Right.
It's just been degraded, but it's been degraded to a minor variance.
Yes, that was in the staff report. This is now a minor variance request, though it has a major number. Okay?
And how many bedrooms does the main principal dwelling?
It's 4? Yeah, 4.
So the principal building requires 4 parking spaces?
No, so the principal building is classified as a single-family rental, and single-family homes require 2 spaces. And this being a second principal dwelling would also be classified as a single-family rental, so it would require 2 spaces. So the minor variance would reduce the number of spaces from 4 to 3.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further comments from anyone on the board or questions? Then we're ready to call this matter for vote.
Ms. Chester?
So it's not three now. It's only, it has three. There's 3 parking places.
Currently.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay, yes.
Mr. Cho? Ms. McLaughlin?
Yes.
Mr. Rush?
Yes.
Ms. Uchtman? Mr. Wormbrun?
No.
Mr. Welch?
Yes. That motion carries by the necessary vote, now being a minor variance, so it is approved. We now call ZBA-2019-Major-10 for a motion.
I move that we approve ZBA 2019 Major-10 and variance to reduce required lot width and forward it to the city council.
Is there a second to that motion? It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion by members of the board?
Yes, I do have a question.
Go ahead.
If by approving this, then we are going to be sending to city council a recommendation for approval that this garage be permitted to be used as a living space.
Essentially, yes, because they wouldn't be allowed to establish a second principal dwelling. They wouldn't be allowed to establish a second dwelling on the lot without this variance.
And so a yes vote on this would then allow,
Right, that would be in favor of allowing the garage to be used as an apartment.
Go ahead, Joanne, if you have something to say, that's fine.
just comment that I think as we are voting here, we need to think about what zoning was designed for, what the meaning of this was, what the similar circumstances can be. And I just feel that we are not upholding the zoning that we have previously worked to uphold. I've been doing this zoning board of appeals for at least 10 years and tried to uphold what was established a number of years ago rather than somehow trying to allow all the variances requested.
But the purpose of this board is that when special circumstances arise, we work with the petitioners to allow for variances to happen. And I think that if, as a previous commenter showed, there's been a marked rise in cases coming before this board. I mean, maybe there does need to be some reexamination of zoning of whether or not that's in keeping with what the community needs are. But that's not up to us to decide. It's up to us to look at the cases that come before us and whether or not the variances are reasonable for the needs of the community.
And I would just make my last comment that I feel that the purchaser did not do due diligence in purchasing this property and recognizing the potential problems he was buying into. I've owned rental property myself, and if I were to want to purchase something, I would, make sure that every permit had been issued, every condition had been met before purchasing, so that I would not have to make appeal for variances.
I would also like to state that I think that I had the same reaction, that an increase in cases could mean a reflection of changing needs of the community. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. We have seen that single-family neighborhoods, particularly in desirable parts of the community with good access to walking and biking, maybe should be more available to more people and shouldn't be restricted in the ways that they currently are. So I think, again, we take every case as it comes, but this apartment has been occupied, so it's desirable, and there have been no complaints. The only reason people have come out to complain is because they just learned that it existed. They didn't complain before. So I would argue that I don't necessarily see this as a red flag. The purchaser is doing work to bring it into compliance, and that's what we're working jointly to do.
Echoing what Adam said, this is the Zoning Board of Appeals, meaning that it is our job to decide the cases before us on the merits, and if we approve, that necessarily means we are allowing some deviation from the zoning. If that was not desired, then there would be no zoning board of appeals, and whatever zoning was in place would be governing. Echoing something of what Ashley said, zoning ordinance, like many other written laws, oftentimes get passed by circumstances. And drawing on my career, we hear this all the time in regards to the Constitution, that some people want it just as it was in the 1790s when it was written, and other people say that it should keep up with changes in circumstances and conditions. Many times that's what ends up happening with zoning appeals, that circumstances and conditions have moved beyond the requirements of zoning and present new conditions to be considered. So that, and I noticed, I wasn't here at the last meeting, but I noticed in some of the written communications, people speaking of a desire for uniformity. And that's always a good thing, but I believe it should never be an absolute, because oftentimes that leads to rigid circumstances and conditions in a desire to make everything be uniform. So without having zoning changed over and over and over and over again, I think a process of appeals was put into place so that matters, again, as Ashley said, could be considered on their own unique circumstances to see if an appeal and a variance, however you want to phrase it, a deviation from the zoning would be permissible and desirable. And so I think that we have to balance all of those issues, a desire to have compliance, but also a desire to be able to allow meaningful deviations from strict dictates of zoning ordinance. And I think, again, in this particular case, that I think is especially critical, that this is not a situation where something new is being put into place. This structure was already there before the present petitioner purchased it, and I think it is of significance that there is not a desire for radical, visible deviations from the outside or to the outside of the structure. And we're talking about parking, occupancy, things that will exist within the confines, perhaps, of the existing structure. So these are all things I think that people should keep in mind when they wonder why there are appeals granted when we have a zoning ordinance. That's all I have to say. Thank you. I believe we're done then with this. Oh, we didn't vote on the last one? Sorry, I spoke too soon. All right, call the last one, I'm sorry.
Ms. Chester?
Yes.
Mr. Cho? Yes. Ms. McLaughlin?
Yes.
Mr. Rush?
Yes.
Ms. Uchtman? No. Mr. Warmbrun?
Yes.
And Mr. Walsh?
Yes. That is approved by the necessary margin to forward it on to the city council for consideration at that same October meeting.
Yep, October 7th.
Thank you to all who have participated in this particular hearing this month and last month. Your input and opinions are what makes this such a vital and progressive place to live. Thank you. What's next? Let me see. Where's my agenda? Okay, at this time, we are calling for hearing ZBA 2019-Major-11, a request by Robert Freeman on behalf of First United Methodist Church for a major variance to construct an electronic display at 304 South Race in B4, the Central Business District. Do we have a staff report, please?
You certainly do. Good evening, everybody. So you have before you a request by the United Methodist Church to construct an electronic display at 304 South Race Street, which is in the B4 Central Business District. The church is planning to upgrade their 70-year-old sign and would like to use a sign that is more versatile, more convenient to update, and more energy efficient. The zoning ordinance only allows electronic displays in the B3 General Business District and in the CRE Conservation, Recreation, Education zoning districts. For the major variance to be approved, the ZBA must recommend approval by a 2/3 majority and forward to City Council for final review and approval. First, United Methodist Church is upgrading their sign, which is located at the southeast corner of South Race and West Green Streets. We have the church here, and the sign is located here at the northwest corner of the parcel. The internally lit sign was installed in 1957. It incorporates the church's logo and has a cabinet for displaying a message, typically printed off on a piece of paper and then applied inside the cabinet. The applicant would like to install a new sign comprised of an internally lit section with the church's name. Let's skip ahead to that. Which can show service time, and then above an electronic display component, which can show service times, upcoming events and meetings, and messages to congregants and the general public. This proposed sign would meet the freestanding sign requirements of the zoning ordinance for a freestanding sign in the B4 Central Business District in any event. And the proposed electronic display would meet the zoning requirements for an electronic display as if it were in a B3 district, meaning the percentage of the sign that was allowed to be an electronic display and its height, etc. Other than the proposed variance, the proposed sign would meet all other zoning requirements. Going back to the zoning, this parcel and lands to the west, north, east, and south are all Zone B4 Central Business District. Land to the southwest is zoned a combination of mixed office residential, and further west and south it gets into residential districts, but not immediately adjacent to the parcel. Going back to the sign design, it would be 92 inches tall by 87 inches wide, with a total sign area of 36 square feet, 48% of which would be the electronic display. The zoning ordinance allows an electronic display to be up to 50% of the total sign area if it were in a B3 general business district. The existing sign, as I've described, does not accommodate easy changes to the service times or messages and requires printing off new messages on paper and manually attaching it over the old message. The staff report gave a little bit of summary about the evolution of zoning regulations for electronic displays. In summary, although they've been permitted as early as 2002, they have only been permitted for community events in the B4 district and for non-community events in the B3 and CRE district. The proposed sign is technically for a non-community event or purpose in the B4 Central Business District, so it kind of falls in between those two allowances for electronic displays. Let's see, going through the variance criteria. Criteria number 1, the special circumstance in this case is that the church essentially functions as a community resource, hosting events that are free and open to the public, so that the proposed sign should be considered as a community event sign, which would normally be permitted in the B4 district, rather than as a commercial sign, which is permitted only in the B3 or CRE districts. Since the regulation started in 2002, the only exception to this restriction has been for community events. This later became even more restricted to only community events held on city property. In comparison to a business operation, the church is a community resource, and its public events should be treated as community events. Criteria number 2, the request is not meant to correct a situation knowingly created by the petitioner, as the subject site has been zoned central business since the inception of zoning in 1940. To permit a freestanding electric display by right, the subject site would need to be rezoned to B3 general business, which would open up a whole other host of issues. The third criteria is that the proposed sign should not alter the character of the neighborhood. The new sign will be in the same location as the existing sign, which has been in place since 1957. The fourth criteria, the proposed variance should not create a nuisance to adjacent properties for 2 reasons. The existence of a sign at that location since 1957 has not been determined a nuisance, and that the proposed electronic display will not face or be within 100 feet of a residential district or use. The sign will comply with all other zoning regulations that apply to electronic displays, including frequency of message change, brightness, and auto-dimming requirements. The fifth criteria, the minimum deviation from the requirements of the zoning ordinance would be to allow an electronic display in the B4 zoning district, which is the subject of the zoning request, variance request. The only other option would be to rezone the subject site to B3 general business, which would permit an electronic display by right. This would be in direct conflict with the 2005 comprehensive plan, which calls for central business as the future land use for the area. And finally, the practical difficulty in carrying out the zoning ordinance in this case is that the prohibition on electronic displays in the B4 district, except for community events, is primarily to maintain the essential character of Urbana's downtown. The church's location on the periphery of the B4 downtown central business district reduces the likelihood that the proposed sign would negatively impact the character of the neighborhood, and thence could allow the proposed electronic display to be treated as a community event sign rather than as a commercial sign. The staff report then summarizes the staff findings. The highlight of main is that the variance request is due to the special circumstance that the church is a community resource hosting events free and open to the public, and that the proposed electronic display should be treated as a community event sign permitted in the B4 district rather than as a commercial sign permitted only in the B3 or CRE districts. The Zoning Board of Appeals has the following options in ZBA case 2019-MAJ-11. Forward the case to City Council with a recommendation to approve the variance as requested based on the findings outlined in this memorandum, or forward the case to City Council with a recommendation to approve the variance with certain terms and conditions, and if so, articulate all terms, conditions, and findings, or deny the variance request, and if so, articulate findings supporting the denial. Based on the analysis and findings presented, staff recommends that the Zoning Board of Appeal recommend approval to City Council of a major variance to construct an electronic display in the B4 zoning district with the following conditions. The proposed electronic display's location and size generally conform to the attached site plan and specifications, and that the electronic display is monochrome. The second condition was thought to possibly reduce some of the concerns about overbrightness of signs. That was a staff recommendation. The applicant would consider that if you thought that it was a necessary condition. I will bounce back for a minute to show this is a draft site plan. Staff is working with the applicant on producing a final draft site plan. But essentially, the sign would go in the exact same place where it is now and where it has been since 1957. It would be larger in size because it would be taller, but it would still fall within the B4 district's requirements for size. It'd be essentially 19 feet back from the Race Street right-of-way and 25 feet back from the Green Street right-of-way, I believe. Okay, thank you. And so that is more than the required setback of 15 feet for a freestanding sign that would be allowed to be up to 16 feet tall. And this proposed sign is only proposing to be 92 feet, which is less than 8 feet tall. 8 times 12, 96, right, yes. So it's even further setback than it needs to be and shorter than it needs to be. So that is the end of the staff report. Pastor Robert Freeman is here as representing the church and is happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? Go ahead.
The thing about the color, is that the brightness stuff? I get like brightness in general. Does the color impact the brightness, or is it like a traffic thing?
No,
or?
it was more as another option to reduce potential concerns or impacts about distraction from drivers.
Okay.
Or, you know, it's going from being a static paper message
Sure.
to all of a sudden being an electronic display, which is
Right.
going to surprise people for a while, and they'll eventually get used to it.
So more about minimizing the change?
Right.
Okay.
And again, there's not allowed for any electronic display, no animation, no swirling, no scrolling, no fireworks. The message has to be there for a minimum of 3 minutes before it can change to the next message, which means you could sit there for 3 minutes and never see any change.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry, I was going to ask that. So this is that's what the requirement of the community sign is. So can you describe to me what, in your report, you said that this would have to meet the requirements that this typically meets. What are those requirements?
So the significant requirements for any electronic display are that any message change can happen no faster than every 3 minutes. So that's why you could sit at 3 stoplights over by Culver's and still never see the message change, because it has to be there for 3 minutes. That's meant to reduce distractions. It has to only be 3-foot candles brighter than ambient light levels. That way it's not blinding you and you turn back to drive and you can't see because you've been blinded by the sign. And it has to have auto dimming technology built in, so if you have a cloudy day, the sun is darker even if it's in the middle of the day, so that it only stays 3-foot candles brighter than ambient light level. Those are the main requirements. In the B4 district, the electronic display has to be less than half or no more than half of the area of the sign, total sign, so you can't just have an electronic sign by itself.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Okay.
Any additional questions for staff? Thank you. Does the petitioner desire to be heard? Oh, yes. Come forward then.
Good evening. My name is Robert Freeman. I'm the directing pastor of First United Methodist Church, and I want to thank you all for your great work as commissioners. I am the proud pastor of a great facility. 1826, before Urbana was even formed, the church was there. The final fixture was in 1958, and they found themselves doing some incredible work. And so I've been here about 2 years. And in my 2 years, I found that I have 168,000 square feet of building. And we found that Urbana lacked a community partner. So now we have partnered with 15 persons within or groups within the city of Urbana, and they utilize our building from parenting classes to baby fold to common ground, have their board meetings at our facilities. And so it was remarkable that this past week, every day the church was open, 7 days a week. They always talk about a church is closed, not First Urbana. We basically start from 6 in the morning to go to about 7 or 8 or 9 at night. And so we're just happy, and we hope that you would approve our variance, because we need a better looking sign. Amen. Any questions for me?
Any questions for the petitioner? Thank you, sir. Oh, go ahead.
How do you feel about the black-white thing?
My thing is, I want to make sure that it's appropriate for the city of Urbana, not be a big distraction, particularly the fact that you have a hotel piece that's coming in, and we don't want to be a main distraction from them. Mm-hmm. And being a good community partner, we will want to work with all the persons in our community to make sure that we are being at our best.
So that would be okay with you if there was a...
That would be okay with us. Like Urbana High School, they have a monochrome piece.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we were thinking of.
Okay.
The biggest thing for...
I just wanted to point out that we would check with legal division to ensure that we would not be stepping on anybody's First Amendment rights on how they can present their message. So that's kind of a draft condition with lots of caveats. Sorry.
Yeah, that's bingo. We ran it through our attorneys as well, so that's exactly what we're talking about, Religious Freedom Act and all that kind of good stuff.
Any further questions?
And I imagine that you as the pastor and the church governing body would be in charge of all messages on the sign, approving them, even if like one of your community partners wanted to have something, you guys would still be the ones who would choose what to be on the sign. So
Yeah, the Board of Trustees of our church has to officially agree to all the messages that go out, so
Okay.
that's right.
So, yeah, we know who would be in charge.
We can't have somebody freewheeling.
Anything else?
Just one more, if I could.
Yes, sir.
If you ever get a chance, I found that most people in Urbana have not been inside of our building. If you ever get a chance, just come and tour the building and just see what's there, I would invite you to come and look and see what's inside of that great structure.
Thank you for the invite. All right. Is there any further discussion by the board? And I believe we're ready.
Well, I'll just say, I'll go ahead and move then.
Pat, you read my mind.
Okay,
We have a motion, please.
I move that we approve the ZBA 2019 Major 11, forwarding the case to City Council, under the condition that the electronic display's location and size generally conform to the attached site plan and specifications.
It's been moved. Do we have a second to that motion? It's now been seconded. Any additional discussion by the board?
I was just going to say, I didn't think the monochrome issue was necessary, that's all.
Okay. Hearing no further discussion, I believe we're ready to call this motion for a vote.
Ms. Chester? Mr. Cho? Ms. McLaughlin?
Yes.
Mr. Rush?
Yes.
Ms. Uchtman? Mr. Warmbrun?
Yes.
Mr. Welch?
Yes, that motion passes unanimously, so therefore it will be forwarded on to the city council for their consideration at the
October 7th.
October 7th meeting. Thank you, sir. At this time, we are now ready to call for hearing ZBA-2019-minimum-03, a request by Ryan Millican for a minor variance to allow a garage to encroach 2.375 feet into the required 10-foot rear yard at 304 East Kerr Avenue in the R3 Single and Two-Family Residential District. Do we have a staff report,
Okay,
please?
thank you. This has been a little bit of a long meeting, so I will try and keep this brief. So Mr. Milliken has applied for a minor variance to allow a garage addition to encroach 2.375 feet into the required 10-foot rear yard on his property. Mr. Milliken wants to expand his house, and due to the location and the layout of the building, the most logical direction to expand in is to the west. This is where the building is, and let me get to, so here's a picture of the building. The west is to the left, so you can see the garage is already part of the house, and it is on the west side of the house, so expansion makes sense to the west. So it'd be logical to assume that since this house faces Kerr Avenue, that the western yard would be a side yard, but you would be incorrect if you made that assumption. That yard is actually a rear yard because the zoning ordinance essentially says the rear yard is the narrower of the two yards that's opposite of the front yards if you have a corner lot. So this was discovered. Mr. Milliken had submitted building plans through his architect, and we noticed that that was in fact a rear yard, so it was a 10-foot setback that was required instead of 5, as it would be if it were a side yard. So we asked Mr. Milliken to apply for a minor variance. So the existing house, which I just showed you a picture of, here's the elevations showing the existing house and then the proposed addition. You'll see on here, I put some approximations, pretty close approximations based on the site plans of where the rear western property line is, and then where the required setback line would be. So you see the addition would only go a couple of feet into that required setback. So it wouldn't, so it wouldn't be that big of an ask for this minor variance. I'm not going to go through all of the variance criteria, except to say that in our staff report, we feel that the request meets the variance criteria. I'd be happy to go through any of those specific ones if you have questions about them, but for the sake of brevity, I'm just going to say, as I already did, we feel that it meets those requirements. So the staff recommendation is that the Zoning Board of Appeals approve the minor variance request. We would like to add a condition just that the building addition be constructed in general conformance with the site plans that have been presented. If you have any questions, I can answer those. The applicant is here as well, and so is his architect.
Are there any questions for staff?
I just have a question. I'm looking at the second floor plan.
Mm-hmm.
I see that there will be a connection to the hallway of the house.
Yes.
Will the unfinished quotes attic become a living space?
If it were to become a living space, they would have to get the required building permits, and we'd have to review that for zoning compliance at that time. And building compliance, of course.
Any additional questions? Thank you. Does the petitioner wish to be heard? Are there any questions for the petitioner? Hearing none, I believe we're ready to call this motion for vote.
I'll move the motion.
Go ahead.
I'll move that we approve, sorry, I just lost it. EA 2019, minor 03, as requested, with the condition that it generally conforms to the plans presented in this display.
It's been moved. Do we have a second to that motion?
Second.
It's now been seconded. Is there any additional question or comment from the board? Hearing none, I believe we're ready to call this motion for vote.
Joanne Chester? Yes. Sorry. Matt Cho? Yes. Ashley McLaughlin?
Yes.
Adam Roosh?
Yes.
Nancy Uchtman?
Yes.
Charles Warmbrun?
Yes.
Harvey Welch?
Yes, that motion is approved unanimously. Thank you. Thank you for waiting. Yes. Yes, thank you for waiting. All right. At this time, do we have any old business? No?
No, there is no old business.
All right. Do we have any new business?
No, there is no new business.
We have no audience unless you two want to make any comment. All right. Do we have a staff report?
We do.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Just wanted to update you, effective October 17th, I will become Director of Community Development Services. As much as I love to attend evening meetings, I won't be at this one nearly as much. Kevin Garcia has agreed to serve as the Secretary of the Zoning Board of Appeals, so you'll be seeing him some more, and really we'll be relying on staff to take care of things. I'll attend as needed. So thank you, and thank you for your service.
Congratulations. We have a study session? No?
No?
Then at this time, I move that we be adjourned. Thank you.